Reverend Amy Butler, the senior pastor of the Riverside Church, tells the story of one Easter Sunday morning at her former church in Washington, D.C. She had written what she thought was a very powerful, cogent sermon, one in which she would make some wonderful points, she would tell some great jokes, and she would leave the people astonished. And as she reached what was the climax of her sermon and expected to turn to the final 2 pages in which she reached that climax and made her points and brought it all together, as she turned the page, those pages were missing in her manuscript. And she says, it was for her an understanding of what it is to read the Gospel of Mark and to read it in its original form. And the oldest manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark end at verse 8. If you look in the bulletin, I included verses 9 through 20. And if you pick up any Bible, you will also see alternate endings to this gospel. Because you see, it is such an abrupt ending. It is such a harsh transition that we who have been accustomed to inspirational endings, inspirational stories, and Hollywood tying everything up for us in a wonderful package, we're dissatisfied with that. The women ran away astonished. And if we read other translations, it'll say, they went away in terror and amazement. And it makes us think, why did Mark write this story this way? But if we remember reading the other 15 chapters of this gospel, we understand that Mark, as he told the story, told it in almost a Reader's Digest fashion. No extraneous facts, just the facts. And Mark wanted his people to catch the point, to make them think about what they were hearing, so that when we get to this morning, and we get to the end of the story, we are amazed and surprised because Jesus, who Mark has been not so suddenly hinting is God, that he is the Son of Man, he is the Son of God. If he is God, he has died. The Romans, with the collusion of those in the religious authorities, put him to death on Friday. He was buried. And the women have watched the disciples abandon him. The moment Jesus was arrested, it was like, out of here, I'm done. I'm not coming back. In fact, it appeared, as we have read the story, that even God abandoned Jesus. Because Jesus cries out from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? So the women, as they are making this trip in the early morning to finish the burial process for Jesus, in order to anoint his body and to properly wrap him, rather than the hurried burial so that the Sabbath laws would be taken care of. As they approach, they're like, what do we do? He's been buried for 2 days. We watched Joseph of Arimathea put him in the tomb. There is this enormous stone. How are we going to move it? They have their ointments and their spices and their oils to anoint his body and to effectively embalm him. And it is as if Mark is saying one last time, his followers still don't quite get it. They don't quite believe everything that he told them. And isn't that like us? We don't always know 100%. What is it about this gospel that draws us close? What is it that we should follow? Who do we believe? The writers of the gospel story? Or those who say, that's not possible, it could not happen? So as the women come to the tomb, something's not right here, ladies. The stone is not in front of the tomb. It's open. And as they get closer and they look inside, they see this young man in white raiment, as some of the Gospels say. And they realize it is an angel, a messenger of God. And that messenger says to them, do not be afraid. Which we hear often in the scriptures. Be not afraid. Don't be afraid. And that's always a clue for us that whatever follows, don't be afraid, is going to be some big announcement. And it's probably the biggest announcement in the gospel. You came to look for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He has been raised. But wouldn't we say the same thing? Don't we often say the same thing? How is that possible? That he could come back to life? There are many theories about resurrection. There are many ways in which people wish to explain resurrection and Jesus coming back to life. But the point for us, the point that Mark is trying to make, is that Jesus is no longer dead. The grave could not hold him. God would not allow, as I told our young people, God would not allow evil and Satan to triumph. And it is the women who get to witness that and to see it. One of the commentators on the gospel tells us that as the women were walking to the tomb, they may have been grieving Jesus' loss, but at the same time, they may also have been relieved. And we say relief? How often, when we have been taking care of a loved one who is sick and has had a chronic, long, debilitating, terminal illness, we don't look forward to their end, but when they have breathed their last and they finally leave us, we have to admit to ourselves there is somewhat of a relief. That burden has been lifted from our shoulders. We no longer have the anxiety of their care or the worry about how are we going to finance the next treatment. What are we going to do and how are we going to do it? These women may have been considering that Jesus was always talking about the way of the cross. If we really wanted to follow him, we had to take up our cross. We had to follow in his footsteps. To be his disciple meant that we had to be unpopular and countercultural and say things that the majority of our neighbors and friends will not like. Feed the hungry, take care of the sick, clothe the naked, visit those in prison. Many of us don't like to hear that. Let them take care of themselves, or it's their own fault. So for these women, as they approach the tomb, it may have been, we're not happy that Jesus is gone. We thought there would be a big difference in this world. but at least we don't have to worry about whether our life is on the line. We don't have to worry about that costly way of following him any longer. But what causes them terror and amazement is that when the angel says he has been raised, they see God at work. They realize the power of God to be able to take this rabbi that they had followed for 3 years. They take this, and while they think their burden is suddenly done, it's not. In fact, to quote Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's back. And having Jesus back means I have to recommit to that way. I have to recommit to following him. It means I will be taking up my cross. And for many of those who were Jesus' direct followers, they indeed did suffer crucifixion. They were put to death. But for us, in 2018, we also look at this sometimes with terror and amazement when we hear this good news of Jesus, because it means we have to commit ourselves to not living the life that American mythology may teach us. It's not all about me. It's not all about the individual. It's not all about everything that I can lay my hands on and get for myself. It's about following this man, Jesus, and living my life the way he asked me to. When Paul says, he must be priest, I must be priest, and he must increase, it means it's not about me. It's about following God. It's about loving my neighbor. And in 2018, loving our neighbor and hearing that message and living it out is taking up our cross. It's following him. It's not easy. It's not something we want to do. In fact, Mark Lewis Taylor says that to follow this executed God today is to let die the God of religious respectability. It's to be different, to be other, and to work on the margins with those who are other. That is following the way of Jesus. That is the message for us also. Because while the women may have left in initial terror and amazement, we know from history that they could not have remained silent. They were not able to keep quiet. One of the commentators asks, what do you think happened about an hour after they got back home and they were sitting around sharing some food and something to drink together? When they thought about what happened, did they keep quiet? Could they keep quiet? Can we keep quiet? May God add God's blessing